Good morning. I've learned enough to walk upstairs at stages as opposed to try and jump up. It's great to be here this morning. Although I'm from the west of Scotland and I'm now of an age that, frankly, I'm actually grateful to be anywhere. I hope that what I have to say today makes sense and does link to Harry, because I do get the sense in Scotland that things are starting to come together. I don't get the idea that we have it fixed, because we don't. I hope that doesn't shock anyone from Education Scotland. We still send kids to school too young. There's lots of things we still have to do. But I think we're now starting to realise far more the connections of things. So what I want to do to start is just confirm for you that I'm not an academic, which will become clear as this carries on. Neither am I a teacher. I'll also try and temper my accent for our guests. Welcome to Scotland and Glasgow in particular, because I do tend to speak a little quickly when I get excited. So if I do, just do this and I'll slow it down again. What I want to do is try and establish some sort of baseline so that we're all, the analogy is all on the same page. These lights are a bit, we're all on the same page. So I'm going to ask you a question. It's an education conference, for goodness sake. You knew there'd be an exam. It's a multiple choice question, and the good news is there's only two choices. I didn't want to confuse you with that one, that fourth one that's really outrageous and that one that's really close. So what I want you to do is, and think about this, I want you to put your hand up if you're not a son or a daughter. That's cool. Let's start from there. Because, as humans, we're born connected and we stay connected. And it's when we're disconnected that we start to find some challenges in life. And for lots of young people, they're disconnected. For lots of adults who are disconnected, I'm sure Harry spoke about alienation. It's the same thing. The reasons our brains are the size they are as humans is not so that we can go to school and be really clever and be teachers. It's so that we can establish and maintain relationships with other humans. That's why they're the size they are, and that's what most of the capacity is used for. That's why early years are vital, where we learn to communicate, negotiate, to compromise, where all of these things are hugely important. So we're born connected and we stay connected. And this is the test now. I'm a technophobe as well. So it's hugely important. So I'm not going to speak to you today about the technical stuff. Because, we're really good at the technical things. We love the technical stuff. We love continuous professional development and degrees and masters and doctorates, for goodness sake. We love all of that stuff. Really, really important. But what we tend to forget is what's of equal value are our human things. I don't think you can teach every day unless you take your whole self into the school, unless you care, unless you're compassionate, unless you have empathy. Because people who are not cared for don't care. So we need to make sure that connection's there. When you're watching, we can't help ourselves by doing that. When you were watching that film, I'm sure there were a couple of moments where you thought those kids, they just caught you. When you're watching TV, if you watch sports, if you watch the New Zealand team facing you, doing that haka, you get connected to things. My wife's connected to George Clooney, for instance. So we even drink his coffee, which is not... We can't help ourselves. We watch things on TV. We identify with people, even when we don't know them. When Andy Murray weeps at Wimbledon because he gets beat, we identify with him. Not because he's Scottish, not because he plays tennis, because I don't play tennis and I don't know Andy Murray, but I understand that notion, that human notion of being disappointed, about being sad, about being happy, joyous. So it's really important. And the moral sentiments, or the theory of moral sentiments, a rattling good read, although the quote tends to spoil the ending. But it is that notion that we can't help ourselves. We do have that interest in how other people get on. We can't help ourselves, and we shouldn't fight against it. We shouldn't worry about that. It's part of what we are, and it's hugely important, and I think really important in teaching. It's also important in health. It's important in social services, it's important in social work, it's important in policing. You don't care for fellow human beings, why would you do these things? So it's there. But what we've done over the years is we seem to have valued all the technical stuff above that. For instance, the only departments and organizations that have human in the title are human resources departments. Now, for me, there's an irony in that. Because on your job specs, you'll have all of those things. And many, many more. I mean, some job specs don't even have verbs in them. So I go along now to meetings, and I'm on a couple of groups and review groups. And as we go around the table and introduce ourselves, there's some fabulous job descriptions there. And we change our job descriptions every couple of years. Health do it every couple of years. Education, you're not too bad, you hang in it for a while, but normally we change them around. And we have all these things in it. Why is it we don't have those things in it? Because we just assume that when we're employing human beings to do a job that they'll bring those things with them. But then what we do is we hammer it out of them. Don't touch children. Don't cuddle them. That's unprofessional. Don't like them. Because in Scotland, you know, sometimes, I'm not sure we actually like kids. I think sometimes we just tolerate them. Well, perhaps some people just tolerate them. And we have to get past that. We have to start to listen to children and listen to what they say. And personally, I was hugely surprised when I started to listen to them. I mean, I've been married for 41 years to the same woman, I should add. And I have 2 adult, now, daughters. So I've been living in this cloud of estrogen now all this time. So speaking at education conferences with all you women here, it's fine. In early years, it's nearly always women. So men, it's great to see you here. We have a role to play in this, which is hugely important. So we have to remember the importance of these things. Because when you're in a classroom, the kids don't really care where you got your degree. They don't really care if you've been in a CPD program for a particular thing. They just see somebody that they want to trust, somebody whose relationship with them is consistent, is good, and supportive. Not just in teaching them things, technical things, but in how to be an adult, how to be part of the world, how to have a good relationship. Really important. So, in the introduction, you'll know I was a cop for nearly 39 years, which you'll find hard to believe, I know when you see me, you look at me. But violence, or violence prevention in particular, was my thing. And what we've done with violence is, like lots of other things, or what we did do, is if violence was that iceberg, we worked above the waterline. We chipped away at the bit of the iceberg we could see. So we increased sentences, we built prisons, we had more cops, we had more laws, we made things illegal, we did all of that stuff. And yet violence didn't go down. Violence stayed the same. Over a third or 2/3 of people who turn up at hospitals because of violence didn't report it to the police. So we didn't make any difference to the size of that iceberg. We're really good at policing. Detection rates for murders are 99-point-something%. But every time we made a difference, the iceberg just bobbed up a little, stayed the same. So if we want to reduce violence, first of all, we need to raise the temperature of the water and shrink the iceberg. And that's about understanding what we mean by violence. And violence is everything from bullying through to suicide. Suicide is self-directed violence. And in Scotland, we have dreadful rates of suicide, particularly among men. We need to fix violence against women, because if we don't fix violence against women, we'll never fix violence. Domestic violence affects everyone across social class. It's a huge issue for us. We need to do that. And once we do it, we'll start then to make a difference. So, adverse childhood experiences. These were a couple of longitudinal studies, loads of papers written about them by Vincent Felitti and colleagues in the States. And what he was speaking about was that babies, before they're even born, in mum's womb, mum's providing a safe place for that baby to grow and develop. But if mum's living in a relationship where there's violence, if there's alcohol, smoking, drugs, that will affect the baby before they're even born. And then when the baby's born, if they're born into that environment where there's violence and aggression, that won't help. If you bring a child up in a war zone, you'll create a warrior. And think, too, about violence as we don't learn how to be violent. We learn how not to be violent. We all have the capacity for violence, particularly the males among us. But we learn not to be. Because what we do is we learn to communicate, to negotiate, to compromise. We learn empathy. And therefore, violence and aggression becomes the last thing in the options menu. For lots and lots of young people, lots of adults, they don't have that option menu. They only know one thing. So young men at 15 and 16 in some areas around the world don't leave home in the morning to say, I'm going to be violent today. That's the only thing they know. Mums and dads, when babies are born and they get that rush of oxytocin, that ability to love, they don't say, I'm going to make your life hell. They don't say that. If we went into prison and spoke to young men in prison who are also fathers, not just prisoners, they would say that they don't want the same for their children as they experience. And yet that's what happens. Because if you're in prison, your children are far more likely to go to prison as well. The same way that Harry Burns' children are doctors. My oldest daughter's a detective inspector in the Rape and Sexual Offences Unit in Glasgow. How did that happen? The same things happen. I bet you the people in here whose fathers and mothers were teachers, whose daughters and sons are teachers. That happens. So we shouldn't be surprised about it. But it's a negative thing that we can fix. So, children are born like that, born into that environment. Then they'll go along to nursery. And you'll notice these kids in nursery because they won't have a lot of language skills. A really powerful indicator of neglect. They won't have a lot of language skills. They won't play well with other children. They won't be able to problem solve and organize themselves. They won't share things. They can be aggressive, low attention, short attention spans. And then by the time they go to primary school at 5 here, sometimes even less than 5 here, they'll go into school and they won't do well. Things won't get better. They will still be like that. They'll start to get themselves a little detached, a little disconnected, a little alienated. And in the process, then, they won't learn those technical skills like reading and writing, the fundamentals about literacy and numeracy that will help them improve the rest of their education. They won't. They'll go to secondary school at 12 or 13, and it won't get any better. We sometimes call kids who act out attention seekers. They're actually connection seekers. That's what they're looking for, connections. And then when they get to 13 or 14, we issue them with hormones, whether they need them or not. And it's my experience sometimes we'd be better holding them back for a few years. And it doesn't get any better. Those are the kids then who sometimes in old days in Scotland would be excluded from school. Just as an aside, we used to have a real problem in Glasgow with gangs. Young men involved in territorial gangs in some of our poorest housing estates. They carried knives, they attacked each other all the time. We ran a gangs program about 4 or 5 years ago in the East End of Glasgow with education and social work and housing and health. Gang fighting's now an exception rather than a norm. Admissions to hospital for knife injuries are down 34% than they were last year. Made a huge difference. Exclusions from school in Glasgow dropped by 85%. Not because of the gang fighting. The gang fighting dropped because the exclusions dropped. It's the same people we're dealing with. So as professionals, we often define and see people by the service we deliver to them. You see pupils and students. I see victims and accused and witnesses. Social workers see clients. It's the same people. They're people first. And if we see them as that first, it becomes much easier. Then, these are the kids then, in their early teens, they start to get involved in risky behavior because risky behavior is what humans do. But we have parameters. We understand how to make good decisions about ourselves. We don't bump into things. We can try alcohol and not become alcoholics. We can try drugs and not become drug addicts. We can take part in disorderly behavior, but we can calm that down. And lots of these young people then get themselves involved, and it becomes too late. They become completely disconnected. They enter a cycle of prison and offending, of alcoholism, of drug abuse. They have no good relationships. And those are the people who keep our life expectancy very low in some parts of Scotland. That's why the drive for reducing that inequality gap, that attainment gap, is hugely important. Because some of the kids we saw, the kids playing, I mean, I came in this morning and heard Packer Bell's cannon walking along the corridor. I mean, superb. But there are loads of kids out there who are not like that. It's fine to see all these wonderful children doing great things, and we must help them be as good as they can be. But at the same time, we need to help those who need a bit more help. And it's true, there's a guy who works for the Violence Reduction Unit that Karen McCluskey and I set up. James, who has a very colourful history and lots of time in prison and drug abuse. And James says, the people who need the love the most are usually the hardest to love. The kids in the classroom that give you the biggest amount of trouble, those are the kids who need you the most. Always. So those are the people who'll die earlier and keep the life expectancy down. And in the interim, will have dragged down a whole range of services and made things very, very difficult. Vincent Felitti. So we go through this process. You'll have seen all this before in your own lives. I mean, for me, when I was investigating murders, I would be asleep normally, 2 a.m, and thriving. And then the phone would go. And I'd start to move through that. I'd start to take notes about what was happening, because people always get murdered in the early hours of the morning. It's seldom between 9 and 5, I've found. And I'd just be coping, taking notes about it. And as I was driving into the office, I'd be starting to think all of the things I had to do. And then as I arrived at the office, there would be a great phalanx of people around wanting to tell me what happened. And I would be in the chaos mode by then. And I always go over that by saying, somebody put the kettle on. Because whoever's dead, I presume, will stay dead, so we can just relax and do the right thing. It's called the golden hours. That's the same for you. It's the same for me. When I'm traveling and I think I've left my passport at home as I'm standing at the airport, I move into the chaos thing, just in and out again. So we move in and out these things and get by them. If you missed your train, well, the car won't start. She should have been in by now. It's bloody 11 o'clock. Where have I put my wallet? My credit card? You move in and out of these things. There'll be children in your classroom who are living in the top end of that all the time. When you speak to them about what they want to do for their future is that day. They want to get through the day. So I always mention when I'm speaking to teachers when they're getting ready for getting back to school. My wife was a teacher, I should say. So we used to enjoy the holidays, the best thing about teaching. I'll not go there. June and July, you know that, or July and August. And she used to always talk about getting ready to go back, and she would start, the week before, complaining about it, and then starting to get things organised, she was a secondary school teacher, did modern studies and history, so you had started to get organised for it. When they went into school, there would be big talks from the head teacher, inspirational stuff, let's go, this is the thing, the best school in the world, we'll turn out people, it'll be fabulous. Who gets the kids ready for that? Who gets the kids ready? Nobody. Maybe their parents, the good ones, parents will have them organised. More than just going to the shops and buying a new blazer or new trainers or whatever it may be, but actually getting them organised to come back to school. So that preparation stuff is hugely important, and you'll have lots of kids in your class who are living in that chaos most days. Harry Burns spoke about this yesterday, I'm sure, the sense of coherence, Antonovsky. So I ain't going to go past that, or I ain't going to go over that again, except to say that it's hugely important, and just to support the stuff that Harry's saying, hugely important, these kids in your classroom. A very quick story. In Scotland, in some of our schools, we have campus police officers. Not there to police schools, but there to work with the head teacher and other teachers in being a face to solve problems, to encourage resilience and well-being in schools and pupils. A friendly face, someone who can help out. If someone doesn't turn up for school on a Monday, can we find out perhaps did something happen at the weekend? Well, the boy who didn't turn up, his father was arrested for assaulting his mum on Saturday and is appearing at court. He's not there. So we can help with that. We can be there in parents' nights, and we can add value to it. A cop was telling me a story once in a school in Scotland, about 3 years ago, where he walked down a corridor and there was a young girl of about 13 or 14, standing outside the corridor. And he knew her, and she came from a really difficult family. And he said, why are you outside the... She said, I was put outside because she wouldn't take her coat off. And the teacher had asked her to go out. So he said to her, oh, why wouldn't you take your coat off? And the reason she didn't take her coat off is because she didn't have a clean blouse or shirt to wear. Underneath her coat, all she had was her bra. 14. I can imagine how that would be. So he organised with the head teacher to go to a local shop and buy a couple of shirts and gave her a shirt and go in. Now, the things that come out of that for me, one, there was a 14-year-old girl who, despite that, wanted to go to school. That's hugely important. Two, the teacher didn't realise the background of that girl, because sometimes we hold that information back from classroom teachers because it's only the guidance teachers who need to know that. Hugely important that classroom teachers understand what's there. So the sense of place and where we are and identifying that is very important. So in relation to violence, this model, those life skills are hugely important. And that's why the most important 4 years of a child's life are up to age 3. What happens then, hugely important. So we have an early years task force in Scotland. We're doing lots of stuff in the early years. The other things that are important are relationships. Parenting is hugely important. Now, I don't mean good parents or bad parents, but parents being as good as they can be. And I don't think that we can actually achieve things in schools unless we start to involve parents far more than we do. And stop all the I'm a professional, I know best stuff. Because it goes on. It needs to stop. There'll be parents there who are a real challenge for us, who will ask us hard questions, who will be difficult. But some parents were also at school and had a hard time and didn't do well. You might be talking about a second or third or fourth generation. So it's really difficult. So unless you help the parents to help the children so that they can be all they can be, it's not going to work. And we're starting to do that much, much more. To understand in a school, it's more important what happens in that local community, that connection in that local community. What's here, what matters. That's how we can do it. It's not just the job of the teachers to educate. Because when we say education with a capital E, that's about teachers. But education is everybody's responsibility. My daughters didn't go to school until they were 5, but they could do lots of things, you know. They could talk, which was pretty cool, I thought. It's not so cool now, I have to tell you. They could dress themselves. They could socialise. They could do a whole range of things. Their mum never gave them any lessons in history or modern studies. But they could do all of that. So we need to understand the role of teachers. And it's not just delivering the technical skills, which you do so well, but it's also about connecting. It's also about making those connections and encouraging those connections to make sure we can do all the other stuff. In terms of community, that tolerance thing, we tolerate lots of stuff. We need to change that. In the East End of Glasgow now, during the gang project, we were only there about a year, and we got a phone call, and I got a phone call from the Chief Inspector of Police, who phoned me up and said, boss, they used to call me boss, that gangs project's working really well. And I said, yeah, I know, it's looking good. I said, the figures seem to be going down, the health seems good. He said, no. We got a complaint about dog fouling. Because up until then, you know, people thought that that's what happened. People thought that gang fighting's what happened. Young men thought that's what they did. So what you do in school is give them another future. This is not what needs to happen. This is not your course. It's not set. Make your own course, and I'll help you do it. Not solve it for you, not do it for you, but I'll stand alongside you while we work it out. That's what we need to do. That's what teachers do. And finally, the inequality stuff is hugely important. I've spoken about that. And Scottishness. You know, in Scotland, we've got the Calvin gene. You know that proof positive that every silver cloud does indeed, every silver lining does indeed have a black cloud. You know that idea? How are you doing? No bad. How are things? Okay. We need to aspire, and we're starting to do that now in Scotland. I used to say, we need to aspire to build cathedrals. And if we're going to fail, let's fail spectacularly. Let's not fail trying to build a garden shed. Let's try to do it. And that's what we're trying to do. Of course, let's not make it worse, and let's do no harm, but let's be ambitious for what we do. Now, these are all the strategies and policies we have. They're great. I mean, curriculum for excellence is not a curriculum for mediocrity. That's ambitious. Excellence. Loads of stuff there. I mean, there's a couple of things I would say, though. Getting it right for every child. Fabulous. I'd like to get to the place where we don't need a policy that says that, because that's what we do. We love our children. That's what we do. But right now it's there. But the point about all those policies is they're fine. They're important. But policies never change, and strategies never changed anything ever. I always ask audiences this: has anyone ever been in charge of a strategy that's failed? No. I ask every audience that. No one's ever said, excuse me, yeah, I had one, catastrophic. Nobody. So if all of these strategies we've had have never failed, why are we still here trying to do this and make it better? Is that the way it's meant to be? Maybe it is. Because it's important that we bear in mind all we're trying to do is make it better. It's not there to be fixed. It's our job to make it better, to make it as good as it can be. So they're all there. So 99% of failure occurs at delivery. That's us. Front end. Sorry, that's you. Front end. That's where it happens. But we get back into that notion of technical skills. I get called sometimes and said, John, would you come and speak to this conference about leadership, about adaptive leadership, about transformative? And I think, what's that? I don't know what that is. Why we get so tied up in being technical. It's that quote there from Miller and Hall. It sucks the humanity out of us. Let's not forget that, first of all, that you're teaching humans, first of all. No pupils, humans. That's who we're teaching. That's who we're dealing with. So, Tolstoy. It's not the big things. It's the little things that make a difference. Tiny little things make a difference. Things that you do every day that you don't often see. He's my favorite guy in the whole world. I don't even remember, I think it was mid-80s, Tiananmen Square. The guy stood in front of the tank. A couple of days before, there had been riots, and the army had put it down with some brutality. And it was bad. Next day, he was out, saw the tanks going back in the square, and thought, I need to do something about that, and stood in front of the tank. If you watch it on YouTube, you'll see that the tank tries to get around him, he stands in front of it, he climbs on top of the tank, he speaks to the people in it. It's a human speaking to somebody else. Sometimes you need to stand in front of the tanks. You know that notion of, Aristotle said, moral wisdom is the combination of moral skill and moral will. It's not enough to just know the right thing to do, you need to actually do it. And sometimes we know the right thing to do, but we don't do it. That's bad. We shouldn't. And it's really difficult. So as leaders, we need to create an environment that allows people to stand in front of your tanks and say, we need to do this a bit different. What I like best about him, though, is he's been out shopping, which is really cool. So that wasn't a policy or a strategy that got him in front of the tank, and I'm sure it wasn't risk assessed. He just said, I'm doing something about this, what can I do, and this is what I can do, and he did it, and it made a difference. And his wife's back home saying, he left here 2 hours ago to go to the shops. And he'll come in with this story about meeting a tank in Tiananmen Square, and she won't believe him. It's how I imagine it'll play out. That's what you give children every day. Some of the most challenging kids, that's what you give them every day. And hope, Václav Havel said that hope is not the belief in a particular outcome, but the belief that what you're doing is the right thing. That's what it needs to be. Not the hope that this young person's going to get 7 pass their exams or do this or do, but you're doing the right thing for that kid. It's hugely important. Every day in school, you get that opportunity to do that. And I always say to teachers, I don't have the evidence for this, but I was a cop for 39 years and locked up lots of people who are in the jail now. And I don't have the science, I don't have the evidence, but I'm absolutely convinced that today there are people walking around in good jobs, having good lives, in good relationships, being good dads and good mums, because somebody, a teacher, took an interest in them at an important time in their life. You have probably already done it for countless of kids. But we don't know, because the things that really count can't be counted. But I'm absolutely convinced you get the opportunity to do that every day. And it's the notion that you'll feel it. You'll know the difference in an individual and how they are. Director of Education, I think he was in Ayrshire, I can't remember, but he spoke about a teacher's sacred duty. I like that. It's not just a job. It's more than being just a job. You're human. You're helping other humans be as good as they can be by giving them some technical skills, true, but also just by being there sometimes makes a difference. Thanks very much.